going to start the roll sheets at the back. I did not bring you, if you wanted your Scantron, you're welcome to come see me and get it. But since I posted, everybody saw the post with the test and the answer key online, right? So you should have the answers to that. Everybody has to take the final exam. The final exam will be comprised largely of the previous exams, which is good for you because it means that you'll have most of the questions, if not all of the questions, because I get lazy and so I recycle questions for the final exam. And that should help your overall scores, right, in terms of getting where you want to be and getting the value out of this course, which I know for most of you is, you come to me and you say things like, I just got to have a C. What does it take to get a C? Well, look at the syllabus and figure out how many points you have to get a C in here. And it's just based on total number of points. There was a question that was asked if I was going to add points from a bonus on a critical thinking challenge to your first exam scores or your second exam scores. It doesn't really matter because it's all based on what? It's all based on points. So if you get the points, to get the C, it's just based on total number of points in this class. I used to do a weighted average on these things so that the exams were worth slightly more than the other components of the class. But apparently nobody knows how to calculate a weighted average, and I was having to calculate people's weighted averages for them constantly. So I just gave up on that, and I decided to be lazy and do what was easiest on me and avoid the questions. So it's just based on a total number of points. So when you get bonus points, it just goes into the total number of points, and you earn bonus points. And we'll have a critical thinking challenge today, which will give you, again, an opportunity to get bonus points for exceptional answers to the critical thinking challenge. So we need to talk about consumer behavior today. It's a big part of marketing. Marketing's two foundational disciplines, as you should know by now and should come tripping off. There's several things that by the end of the semester that you should just, when I say marketing, it just should come tripping off your tongue. Fully integrated, the only fully integrated function of the verb, and a pervasive social activity. The second is that consumer behavior and marketing is enormously important, and it's predicated on one of the two foundational disciplines, and that should come tripping off your tongue as well. The two foundational disciplines of marketing from an academic perspective are psychology and economics. And you see the confluence of these two in consumer behavior theory. So a lot of consumer behavior theory is predicated on what's called the rational actor model. Now, one of the things that we have to think about in this is a question, and I will give whoever can come up with an answer between 5 and 10 points, depending on how good your answer is to this individual critical thinking challenge. Is it possible, so the first person to raise their hand and give me a plain answer, is it possible to pursue an irrational goal from a completely rational perspective? In a rational manner, yes.
Yes, as long as the process you're going through is logical, it would still be rational and make sense, and what you're looking for is totally rational. If you're looking for a unicorn, but you did it scientifically, and did the process correctly, what you're looking for is rational, but the way you went about it was correct.
Okay, so that's a really good example. I like that. You came up with an example to give me. That's important to support your arguments with examples, as you know from our logic and critical thinking. So your example was, for those of you who may not have heard it, that we're in the back because it's projecting this way, was he said the answer was yes. You could pursue an irrational goal from a perfectly rational perspective, and his example was you could decide that you're going to pursue finding a unicorn. And you could do that in a rational, comprehensive manner. Finding a unicorn would be an irrational goal because we all know that unicorns are what? Mythical creatures that don't exist. And so trying to find one is completely irrational. But you can go about trying to find this mythical creature in the most rational way. What can you do? Well, you can go to places that unicorns are likely to occur if you believe in unicorns. What are those places? Well, I don't know. They're a horse with a horn that has some magical property. Well, horses eat grass, so you can start looking for places where horses eat grass and start, looking for it. there are people who pursue with fervent passion in very rational, comprehensive ways, going along with Mr. Wardowski's, is that, did I say it? Wardowski's example. There are people who pursue the Yeti, which are the what? What are Yeti? I found evidence that the Yeti do exist. They're at the Guthrie Walmart, and they're in front of me every time I'm there to buy the simplest of items with their little Yeti children, and they're screaming and they're beating their Yeti children, and it's an unpleasant experience for me. So what are the Yeti? What is the Yeti look like? The abominable snowman, right? And there are people that, there's various forms of this. There are people that follow, that believe in the Sasquatch or the giant ape, things like that. And they go out in the woods where people say they've seen the giant ape, and they set up things like this camera here and actually try and track and follow. And they're doing it, I mean, if you're looking for something, they're doing it in a fairly scientific. Now, it's maybe an irrational goal because they don't exist, probably don't exist, never going to exist. But they're doing it in a rational, comprehensive manner. Of course, the ultimate example that you could give is the Holocaust. It's irrational to believe that an entire category of people are inferior and therefore need to be eliminated. But if that is your goal, an abhorrent goal, it is a morally bankrupt goal, but the Nazis did it with a very efficient, rational-like sort of comprehensive method of exterminating a lot of people. So it is possible to pursue an irrational goal from a rational perspective. The reason I say this, and it's important, is because when we think about ethics in marketing, a lot of times philosophers argue that what marketers are doing now is not satisfying needs and wants, but we are creating irrational needs and wants. And if you have an irrational need or want, you can pursue that need or want from a perfectly rational perspective. So don't confuse the pursuit of the goal and its rationality with going about it from a rational perspective. So what does rational action theory say? Well, it says that people pursue goals. We all have goals. And for some of us, our goals are very limited. For others of us, our goals are more lofty. For you, one of your major goals is to what? Graduate. Not just graduate. What's a good goal? Going back to a good goal. Graduate with what? Well, graduate with a degree in 4 years, and just any old degree. You're going to throw darts at a, what do you want to get a degree in? Marketing degree. Marketing, that's right. Marketing and sales. God help you if you want to get a, getting a degree in accounting would be completely irrational, but you could do this rationally. Debits on the left, credits on the right. Yeah, why would we want to remember that? So people pursue goals. And in the pursuit of the goals, they take plans to achieve those goals. Well, what drives most of our goals? Well, it's needs recognition. And so, how do we find that we have needs? Well, Maslow comes up with something called the hierarchy of needs. And this explains a lot of the goals that people are going to pursue. Now, one of the things that we have to think about when we think about Maslow's goals is that, as I understand Maslow, and I had to read him in graduate school, and it was a horrific experience for me, he basically says that until the needs at a lower level are met, you don't move to the next level. Now, I'm not sure that that's true when you get into the middle levels of the pyramid, and I'll give you examples of why I don't think that's necessarily a priori true, but at least with regard to these physiological needs, what we call physiological needs at the bottom of the pyramid, which are the need for food, water, shelter, and rest. I don't believe that you can get much beyond this and go on to the next level until these needs are met, and I'll give you an example of that in just a second. So, physiological needs, these base level needs, you have to eat in order to maintain some semblance of life. You can go without food for about 3 weeks before you starve to death. You can go without water for about 3 days. And you can go without air for about 3 minutes. People at this level are focusing a lot on air issues, right? And I mean, not literally, but figuratively speaking, they're focused on air issues. If you think about this, people that are very poor and subsistence farmers in various areas of the world are focused on getting enough daily caloric intake to survive, enough water to not die of dehydration, and some place to rest, and so that you're not dying out in the elements of cold. As a result, you may forego safety needs. In fact, you're probably going to go forego safety needs if you have the opportunity and you're at this level. What might you do if you were starving to death? That could lead to bad results, particularly in places like Oklahoma, where we love our guns. We're fervent supporters of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution and the belief that you should have every right to pack your weapon wherever, whenever, and however you want, in whatever form. I say this as a card-carrying member of the NRA and as somebody who holds a concealed carry permit. I think that that's a great thing. Shouldn't we all strap on our guns and go to town, because it's just the Wild West out here. In fact, there's an argument that can be made that the problem is not with too many guns, but it's with too few guns. I sat on city council with a guy named Jason Murphy, who's now a state representative. He's term limited out. But when he was on city council with me in Guthrie, he wanted to pass an amendment that required anybody who was man, woman, or child over the age of 18 to not only could you carry a gun, but be forced to carry a gun. And his theory was that if everybody's packing, nobody's going to do anything. It's what we might call a micro level. This was what occurred during the Cold War. Most of you don't remember the Cold War. You were alive in the Cold War, and it might as well be as much of a history as World War II or the Revolution. And what led to the Cold War era being a very stable area, actually, in terms of international relations, was something called MAD. Mutually Assured Destruction. The Russians had all of these weapons that would be enough to annihilate life as we know it on Earth. The United States had all of these weapons that would be enough to annihilate life as we know it on Earth. And as a result, nobody went to nuclear war, did we? Because we knew that if we started a nuclear war, they would retaliate massively and both sides would end up dying. So it was mutually assured destruction. So there was this theory that what we need is not to get rid of guns on a micro level. The idea is that if everybody in this classroom has a gun, am I likely to use my gun? Probably not, because I'm going to be doing what? Afraid that if I start using my gun, because you fall asleep in my class, and justice should be fast, you're going to massively retaliate against me. And so, the reason I bring up this example is, if you're starving to death, even if everybody, like they do in Oklahoma, we have lots of people that pack guns around here, even if you're starving to death, you might risk, it's a risky proposition to break into somebody's house in Oklahoma, because you might get shot. Now, we're not as civilized as they are in Texas. In Oklahoma, you do not have an obligation to retreat to the wall, but you may not shoot to protect your chattel property. Chattels are your personal property. That's the stuff people break in to steal. In Texas, they're far more sophisticated than we are. You can shoot to protect your chattel property. Okay? So what this means in Oklahoma is that when somebody breaks into your house, if they've got the television and are running out the door, you can't shoot them in the back. But I would submit to you that breaking into somebody's house in Oklahoma is still a dangerous proposition, because they're going to say, "Ooh, I feared for my life and my family." And you might wind up dead. Now, if you're starving, you'll probably take that risk, won't you? People break in all the time to people's houses, particularly in certain parts of the city, to steal because they're starving to death. So they'll forsake their safety needs. If you're worried about safety, you're not going to be breaking into anybody's house, are you? Because in Oklahoma you might get shot. But they'll forsake their safety needs. Now, when it comes beyond that, I don't know that you can't move between these levels. And I'll give you an example. Maslow would say that if you are afraid, you're not going to move beyond safety needs to the need for belonging, love, intimate relationships. So these are, social needs and then esteem needs. And I don't think that's true. If you think about it, in Texas, when George W. Bush ran for governor against Ann Richards, he was the most disciplined campaigner I've ever seen. He had the people of Texas believing that there were hordes of feral children raping and pillaging and plundering the state of Texas, and that that must be stopped. He was focusing on an anomaly in the crime statistics. When Bush ran against Ann Richards, the crime rate was decreasing, and it has, by the way, been steadily decreasing almost every year since then. Why is that? Well, there are a number of reasons why that is. First of all, the population is getting older. You generally don't go out and engage in crime as you get older. Second of all, the economy has been generally pretty good, with a few exceptions, and particularly during that time period, the economy was pretty good. And people, if they have a job, generally don't need to go out and steal, right? But there was an anomaly in the crime statistic in that they had never disaggregated juvenile crime. So it looked like juvenile crime was on the rise when they did the disaggregation of juvenile crime from regular crime statistics. George W. Bush played upon this, and he had people believing that there were these hordes of feral children out there. He said juvenile crime is becoming more violent, more random, and more pervasive in our society. He had people believing that your age group, your demographic, were just out there running around willing to engage in mayhem. And in spite of that, so people were afraid. They voted for him largely on the idea that they were afraid he was going to cure juvenile crime. But in spite of that, people still want to belong to their family, right? We still have safety needs. Why is it that one of the biggest selling products is home safety equipment and these cameras and things like that, when in fact crime is decreasing? But we all put up these cameras now around our house. How many of you have seen the Ring doorbell commercials and the motion detector lights? All of these are better, but in spite of the fact that we feel insecure, even though we're really not, we still have, I think, beyond this lower level, we still have this need for love and belonging in our family. Most of us want to have some esteem. We like things. One of the reasons that I chose to become a lawyer is because it sounds pretty good when people say, when you strike up a conversation at a bar, the first thing somebody is going to ask you is what? What do you do? They're not asking you this because they care about you or they're at all interested in you. They're asking you this because it's an instant way of pegging you on a social strata, on the social ladder. And I figured when I struck up conversations at the bar, I wanted to be able to appear reasonably alert and chirpy, and so you could say I'm a lawyer, and that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? It sounds better than I drive the dump truck, or I'm a garbage man. I've never known anybody who yearned to be a garbage man. I suppose there's somebody out there. It's not a bad job anymore. Some days when I have to grade your papers, I think maybe I would like to be a garbage man, because it used to be that you had to actually pick up the garbage. You don't do, you just drive around the truck and fix it up. I used to be on city council. They make about $35,000 a year. To ride around, pick up stuff. Might not be a bad job. When I have to read your papers and I begin to cry and then I have to drink to become more charitable so that I can get through them. But you can see that I think we still have, sort of this, after you get beyond that basic level, this idea that we can maybe go between the levels, but knowing about where people are and what kinds of needs they have is going to be critical. One of the reasons that ADT is big business and these security cameras are big business in this country is because we feel that we have these needs, that we're afraid of stuff being stolen from us or stuff being taken, and so we can use that as marketers, right? So understanding what people's needs are is important. So how do we go about achieving our goals? Well, we start with the problem recognition, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Then we do a search, an internal and an external search. When our ideal self is not where we want it to be, we start thinking about, well, we've got this problem. Think about this thing. It's getting close to lunchtime. Probably some of you are starting to feel hungry. So you have this recognition that I need food. And you start searching. Well, what did I have last? What do I want? You have lots of experiences with this. So probably pretty much your internal search is going to be about all you need. But if it's a more complex problem than that, you might, or something that you're not familiar with, you might start looking for external sources. Where are you going to find these external sources? Well, it depends on what kind of problem. If it's highly complex, you might, and in this day and age, where do most of you turn when you have a highly complex purchase that you need? Yes, you're doing this. What is that? Your phone. Yes, you have these wonderful devices that are connected with you all the time, and you start looking, in fact, there's become a verb for what you do, you what? You Google it, right? It's become a verb. I Googled it. And you start looking for information on what it is that you want to buy. Once you gather this information, you start evaluating alternatives. And you do this even with an internal search. So you think, I'm hungry, it's almost noon. What am I going to get? Well, if I go over to the food court, what are the alternatives that we have over there? There's Flat Tire, there's Chick-fil-A, Tool of the Devil, along with Starbucks. What else? I'm convinced that they put crack in their chicken because, you know, like I don't know what makes that chicken so good, but, you know, it's completely unhealthy. You know, it's on white bread, the most unhealthy thing that you could possibly. It's like spun sugar. Putting it, you know, right? It's no wonder we have a society that's becoming more and more diabetic all the time. What else do you have over there? You have not Subway, but the knockoff version of Subway, Quiznos. There's some like pizza place, knockoff pizza place, and what else?
Some sort of Chinese.
There's a Chinese thing and sushi. So you're going to think, these are my alternatives if I want to stay on campus. If I want to go beyond campus, I'm going to start evaluating other alternatives. So what's across the street? Well, there's Eddie's, there's, used to be Old Chicago, that's gone now, it's going to be Bricktown Brewery. So there's lots of things. So you start evaluating your alternatives. Based on that evaluation, you make a selection. I've only got 30 minutes between classes, I'm going to run over. That limits my search. You know, I had Chick-fil-A the other day, so I want variety. Variety is the spice of life. I'll do Flat Tire. You arrive at a decision, and then you make an evaluation after you've eaten it. That was the worst hamburger I have ever eaten in my entire life. Yuck, I'm never going to do that again. Or that was the best chicken from Chick-fil-A I ever had, and I'll remember that for next time. So that's sort of the basic for how the rational actor model works. What else plays into this? Obviously your personality. We have consistent behaviors or responses to things. We can be influenced by people, a combination of products or services, and brand purchases. And it depends on whether or not this is something that's new to us or whether or not we're making it an entirely new purchase that we've never done before in our lives. So those kinds of things are part of the things that we have to think about. Now, in response to this, and what we might think of as being Hegelian terms, so Hegel says, basically, it's a little bit, this is a stripped down model of Hegel. Hegel says we start with a thesis. Classical economic theory says people are rational, and there's the rational actor. And this is largely predicated on the idea from economics that we pursue goals collectively through the free hand of the market, that it distributes goods in the most efficient manner, because those people who want something are willing to pay for it, will pay the highest price for it, and therefore put it to the best use. Now what this model doesn't take into account, and what economics doesn't account for, is something that we call in the classical model of economics of maximization of utility, is that in many instances we have what are called externalities to the decision making. Things that are beyond the control or maybe not reasonably foreseeable. And so, in response to that, we get an antithesis, which I had a high school history teacher. He was the same one who told me, there's a reason. I asked students, you know, do you like history? No, I don't really like history. Why didn't you like history? Well, it turns out they had a coach for history in high school. How many of you had a coach? Because the idea was that anybody could teach history or political science, right? It didn't take any skill whatsoever. Let the driver's ed teacher, you know, the football coach teach history. And so, for example, I had a history coach, or a history professor who was a coach in Guthrie High School who told us that, well, first of all, he pronounced this thesis antithesis. It's not antithesis, it's antithesis. He also told us that the Spanish Armada was the largest ship to ever sail the 7 seas. Really? Really, Lowry? Really? Like, they're making huge, it was the largest ship to ever sail. I'm like, the Spanish Armada was like this fleet of ships? Nope. One ship, largest ship to sail the 7 seas, along with his antithesis, which is antithesis. He also told us that Frenchy Huguenot was this guy. Lowry, I think you mean French Huguenots. They settled in Canada and the northern border. No, one guy, French Huguenot. So the antithesis is what we might call irrational actor. IA, irrational actor theory. What irrational actor theory says is that we don't really do this. We just respond to stimuli in very predictable, deterministic ways. Again, this goes back to psychological egoism from the ethics portion of the class, in which we talked about this deterministic attitude. Either as a result of nature or nurture, you cannot help but behave in very predictable ways. You get hungry, you know, for example, that you should not go to the grocery store when you are hungry. One of the things that we know, I have a PhD in this. And I do this. I get hungry and I go to the grocery store, and what ends up happening? I buy lots more than A, what I need or what I intended to. As a result of the fact that everything looks good when you're hungry. It's one of the reasons why I am, when I graduated from high school, I weighed 149 pounds. I had a metabolism that was just incredible. But I like food. I like the victuals. And I like to eat. And so, I do this. I have a PhD. I know I shouldn't do this. I know that what I should do when I go to the grocery store is I should sit down. I shouldn't go when I'm hungry. I should make a list so that I don't start walking by the Fruit Loops and picking that up. Or picking up, the chicken fried steak, things like that that are completely not healthy. And I have a PhD in this, and I still do it. I still go to the grocery store when I am starving to death, and I buy way more than I should. And behaviorists or deterministic philosophers would say, look, we can't help it. That's just the way we operate. Our little brain starts firing off, and we respond to these stimuli in very predictable but irrational ways. And we can manipulate this according to some marketers, like Martin Lindstrom in a book called Biology, which I mentioned before. We can manipulate this. And people tell us that they want something, and it turns out that they don't necessarily want what they say they're indicating based on these fMRI scans of their brainwave activity. One of the things that Lindstrom looks at, and I think I told you all this before, is he looks at smoking commercials and the efficacy of smoking commercials. And one of the things, if you watch these smoking commercials, they are really horrific. You've all probably seen the one where they tell you, the tobacco companies tell you that it's cool to smoke, that pretty and beautiful people smoke, that you'll be hip and cool and popular. But would you smoke if you knew? And then they show you at the end of this commercial, and there's this guy that's sitting in a wheelchair that has one leg amputated, he's kind of grayed out, he's bald, he's missing his teeth. And he says, would you smoke if you knew that it would end? And smokers say, oh my God, that scares me on surveys, and I want to quit smoking. But when they show them the ad and they look at what part of the brain is functioning, as they watch the ad, it's the pleasure part of the brain is firing. So they get out of the machine and they run as quickly as they can to go get a cigarette. And so irrational actor theorists would say people don't really pursue goals, they just sort of react to things. We're just like a tumbleweed blowing around out there. And we just react to various stimuli. And we don't really think about this. Well, is there a synthesis model? Well, so in Hegelian terms, what Hegel says is, you have a thesis. If the thesis sticks around long enough, there will be a response to the thesis, which is the antithesis, not the antithesis, will come about as a response of that. And then from these, you'll get a synthesis. Hegel's most famous student was Karl Marx, who applied the dialectic to economic terms. And he said, look, we had a feudal system, a feudal economy in which you had these lords that ruled everything and owned everything, and people lived off of the mercy of the Lord, and they were subsistence farmers. That gave way to capitalism. Capitalism will give way. The synthesis between these two will be communism, and you'll have the withering away of the state. And at that point in time, Marx says the dialectic ends. Hegel doesn't say that the dialectic ends. I think he continues to go. But, and again, I'm stripping down Hegel. Philosophers would be very unhappy with what I'm doing. So, is there a synthesis model? Well, the synthesis model would suggest that it depends on the level of risk. That with regard to things like eating every day, when we wake up and we're hungry, that's a very low risk activity. Now, maybe it's not. It turns out that in an age in which we can have lots of information at our fingertips, that maybe eating is not such a low risk activity. Is it? They tell you that if you eat certain things, your chances of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and dying earlier all increase. What are the things that you shouldn't eat? Red meat. You should limit the red meat. You should eat lots of vegetables. What else? You should avoid sugar or unprocessed, high fructose corn syrup type sugar, things like that. But that's still, I mean, when we say these things, if I go and I eat Chick-fil-A, tool of the devil, today, and slurp down a Venti, I hate Starbucks. We have a taxonomy in this country. It was given to us by God-given McDonald's. Please follow it, small, medium, large. But if I slurp down a Venti latte, which has 600 calories, and I eat my Chick-fil-A, which has another 1,000 calories with the Chick-fil-A and the breading and the fries and stuff like that, that's really a pretty low risk. If I eat that today and I don't eat it again for 6 months, is that necessarily a bad thing? Probably not. In spite of the fact that the chicken is just chock full of hormones, and genetically modified organisms in the potatoes, it's not going to kill me, if I do that every once in a while. And so that's a relatively low risk activity. If we're talking about low risk, yeah, we probably buy the same things over and over again. You probably have shampoo. Why didn't you choose the shampoo that you use? Probably because your parents chose that shampoo at some point in time, didn't they? Did you all use the shampoo that your parents used? Okay, maybe it's a response to your parents. My parents are lame, they suck, they smell, I'm going to use something else for shampoo. But that's a relatively low risk. Toothpaste is the relatively low risk thing. It doesn't really matter. Why do you really use toothpaste? Does it really help? It has a little bit of fluoride in it, but could you get away with just brushing your teeth and not using the toothpaste? Pretty much. If you floss and brush your teeth, that's probably going to be, that's a very low risk thing. So yeah, you probably just walk by the shelf, and if your favorite toothpaste, because Walmart can't ever get anything right anymore, in spite of the fact that they have the most sophisticated logistics system on the planet, they continue to never be able to have the brand of underarm deodorant or toothpaste that I want when I go to the Walmart with the Yeti that are standing in my way and buying everything that I need, right, in Guthrie. So what am I going to do? If my toothpaste is not there, I just grab the next one over, because I got to have the toothpaste, and that's a relatively low risk. But with regard to high-risk things like housing, automobiles, and major appliances, we probably engage in a more extensive, rational, comprehensive thing. Why is it that everybody, so I used to own this home in Oklahoma City in this kind of hip neighborhood called Edgemere Park. Edgemere Park is directly south, it's directly north and east of a very kind of interesting area in Oklahoma City called Paseo. How many of you go to Paseo? Paseo is this really funky little arts district. They've got this nice street where they've got all these arts, and they've got Picassos and a few bars, and what else is down there in Paseo? I'm trying to think of a really nice restaurants. The pizza place, the sauce is really pretty good. So there's all this stuff. So I lived in a neighborhood that was right next to that. And in the amount of time that I lived there before I moved back to Guthrie, I went through, like on both sides of me, in 5 years I went through 5 sets of neighbors that bought these homes. They were what we might call dinks, like my wife and I were at the time, double income, no kids, and the minute they had a kid, they moved out of Edgemere. Why is that? The Oklahoma City public schools are abysmal. You wouldn't put your dog in Oklahoma City public. So where did they move, would you guess? They moved to the land of the shallow and pretentious, otherwise known as Edmond. Because Edmond has what? Really good schools. So when you buy a house, things like if you have kids, you're probably going to engage in this more extensive type of search. Because that's a high risk. A 30-year mortgage is a high risk. Now, having said that, I'm not sure, I'm still not convinced that that's absolutely true. We say that with regard to these high-risk things, that people actually do engage in this more extensive analysis. But I'm not sure that that's true, and I'll give you an example. I used to teach legal environment business before I got my PhD in marketing. And so at that point in time here at UCO, at that time, students would come to me after they had me in class, and they would tell me things like, have I told you this story about buying houses? No, okay. So my students would come to me and they'd say, Dr. Aguirre, my fiancé, my insignificant other, my girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it was, and I are thinking about buying a house together. And I'd say, well, and they would want to know how they should take title to the house, because they remembered that there's something about you can have different interests in real property, and there are different ways that you can take title, but they don't remember what those were. Okay, so you all probably don't. You should remember this from legal environment of business, but you don't. You're sitting there looking at me like, what? Huh? You haven't taken it yet. How many of you have taken legal environment of business? A few of you. What are the ways that you can take title to property with somebody else?
We're not there yet.
You're not there yet. Okay. All right. Well, you can take title to a piece of property as tenants in common, you can take it as joint tenants, or tenants of the entirety. In Oklahoma, if you are a married couple. Now, the reason they would ask this is they would remember that there are certain advantages and disadvantages to each of these types. And the reason I give you this example is because I would say to them, wait a minute, you and your boyfriend, girlfriend, insignificant other are going to buy a house together. Why aren't you married? Well, we just don't think we're ready for that level of commitment. Then you're not ready to buy a house together. The best thing about marriage is divorce. And it's a wonderfully efficient way of dividing your assets when you decide that you no longer want to see this individual anymore, ever again. You can get divorced much easier than you can get out of a 30-year mortgage. People get divorced in 6 weeks. A 30-year mortgage can take you forever to get out of, particularly if you buy a house that doesn't want to sell and the housing market tanks and you're stuck with it. But divorce is a wonderful way, and the reason I give you this example is that is completely, in my opinion, it is completely irrational to want to buy a house with somebody that you are not married to. Because what you're saying is that this relationship will end, and it will probably end poorly, and then you're going to have to figure out how to get rid of this piece of property, and it's not very efficient. Let me tell you what happens if you're not married. You have to petition to partition the property. And that means that it's going to go to a sheriff's sale, and they're going to sell your house on the steps of the courthouse to the highest bidder on a day certain. That's not how you want to do this. And in spite of the fact that I would say this to these people, they'd still go out and buy the house with their insignificant other in a completely irrational way. Now, maybe they went about it in a rational, comprehensive manner, but so I'm not sure. We generally have a tendency to think that with regard to these higher risks, that maybe people are more rational, comprehensive, but I'm not even sure about that. So what are the influences on consumer behavior? Well, we have sociocultural influences. Things like, why is it that we buy certain brands? Because we're in a culture. If you went to China, they would have different brands that they like and enjoy, and things that they want to have. Family and friends are an important influence on consumer behavior. A lot of what we like is what we are exposed to as a child from our family. A lot of times children say, I don't like that, or I don't want to eat that. It's because their parents didn't what? Expose it to them. Psychological needs are, of course, important. Perception is reality, and perceptions can be extremely fickle things. People have in their mind what they think of when you say certain things, and it's very difficult to change that perception. If I give you, for example, a brand name that you all are familiar with, McDonald's, what comes to mind?
Cheap.
Cheap. What else?
Diabetes.
What? 5-piece, is that what somebody said? Diabetes, okay. So cheap, diabetes. I think what makes McDonald's successful is that they are cheap, fast, and consistent. They're cheap, fast, and consistent. When you go to McDonald's, you know what you're going to get. Now, they want to change their image. I don't know if you've noticed it, but the McDonald's are changing. They are losing market share in the breakfast market, which is one of their most profitable segments, to things like Starbucks. So McDonald's is becoming more like, if you look at their buildings and you look at their breakfast menu and things like that, they are becoming more like what? They're becoming more like Starbucks. Look at their buildings that they're changing to. It's no longer the kiddie playground out front. There are a couple reasons for that. A, it's a big liability. And B, what? They want to compete with a more sophisticated buyer. In spite of the fact that they made changes and their coffee is now much better and it's pretty good, the perception is of most people in the mind of the consumer that they are cheap, fast, consistent, and not good. That's the mind, and it's very difficult to overcome that psychological perception. Psychographics, Strategic Business Insights, offers different types. And you should go into this and take the VALS test. You can go to Strategic Business Insights and take the survey to figure out what type you are. So the VALS divides consumers into more detailed analysis rather than just sort of basic characteristics of demographics, gender, age, family, things like that, into whether or not you are motivated by ideals, achievement, or expression on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis, whether or not you have high access to resources or low access to resources. And so they come up with 8 distinct types, and you should take this. And today's Critical Thinking Challenge is going to focus on the VALS types. So at the top, those with lots of access and that are highly motivated by ideals and expressions and things like that are innovators. These are people that seek lots of information. They're the ones that you go out to dinner with, and they constantly have, if you say something, they're Googling it as fast as you say it, to either fact check you to figure out whether or not you're right, or to figure out what it is that they want. They are skeptical about advertising. They do not believe that advertising is a legitimate source of information for things. They tend to be future-oriented. They're constantly planning for the future, for themselves and their children, and they have a wide variety of interests and activities. These are the people that are out there. They're playing tennis and playing golf and, horseback riding, constantly going and experiencing things. They like to travel a lot and experience new and different things. They're willing to try new foods and new ideas to see what it's like. Then you have thinkers. These are people that have high access to resources. Now, in the modern or postmodern American sense, a lot of these people tend to be older, professional, retired people. They're highly normative. What does that mean by they're highly normative? What does normative mean? Well, you can sort of get there from the root word. What's the root word of normative? Normal. So what would you think that they want? They stick to the stuff that they know. They're normative. They focus on the ought, the way things ought to be. So they stick to what's known. They tend to have sort of traditional values. They plan, research, and consider things. This can lead to what I call analysis paralysis. unlike your generation, and there are people, again, when we talk about these things and when I talk about generational cohorts as being applicable to some of these types, you have to remember that you cannot apply characteristics of the aggregate to the individual or characteristics of the individual to the aggregate. That would be a logical fallacy. So you have to think about, you know, most of these people are older, but there are members of your generation that do appreciate history, but because they tend to be older, wealthier professionals, they have a historical perspective. They like history. They may read a lot of history. They think that you can learn things from the lessons of history. They're financially independent. They're not influenced at all by fads. Innovators can be influenced by fads. They are what we call early adopters of many things that turn out to be not such wonderful things. So for example, one of the things and one of the categories, they have now started in the award ceremonies for various things. I don't think the Academy Awards have a category with this yet, but some of the other awards show, I think like the People's Choice Awards and maybe even the Golden Globes, have a category for social media production. This is a brand new thing. And there are people that are making millions of dollars. I am not, by the way, making millions of dollars off my YouTube channel by recording this and broadcasting it out there. But there are people that are. One of these guys that did this is a guy named, his last name is Paul, I believe. Huh? Logan Paul, and he has a younger brother. What's the Jacob Paul. They both have become internet sensations, and Logan Paul is actually paid by advertisers to produce various funny sort of short clips. Where did Logan Paul get his start? I'll give you 5 points for 20 of Vine. He got his start on Vine. Who said that? You did. Vine. He got his start on Vine, and guess what? Vine is now dead. Vine is gone. So that's an example. Innovators are willing to try this. A thinker would not. A thinker would be like, what's Vine? They will use technology if it's functional. So people like this tend to be, so let's think about your grandparents. Why would they use technology, and what are they going to be using this to control their camera? And I'm learning currently how I can upstream, how I can load this, rather than having to work on this a whole lot, because I'm lazy, inherently lazy. I am trying to figure out how I can stream it directly to YouTube, and I've almost got it figured out. How I can stream directly from the camera to YouTube so that I don't have to actually go in and download it and then put it into Movie Maker and upload it. So I'm working on doing that. That's not what a thinker is going to do. How are they going to use this piece of technology? I guess that is a very functional way, although, I mean, I really don't have to do this. This is because I want to do it for my own interest and because you all are part of my little sociological experiment for my research stream here. And I have a narcissistic personality disorder and I like watching myself on television. What is the thinker going to use this for? What do you think that they would use that device for? It's practical. Most people don't live close to their grandchildren. But now they have the ability to watch them on a daily basis. You used to only see grandma when I was growing up, when you went to Thanksgiving or Christmas or something like that. Now grandparents can see their kids, their grandkids all the time. So they like technology for things like that. They're willing to get on and start Facebook accounts not because they want the sheer joy of figuring it out. I want to figure out data analytics from it, right? What do they want to use it for? Keeping up with their family, their friends, posting pictures, you know, learning about the class reunion, things like that. They like traditional intellectual pursuits. So what are the things that they like? They like opera. They like what else? Musical theater, which is dangerous, by the way. You want to ban musical theater. They love it. They love musical theater. They love opera. They like going to the symphony, not to the rock concert, things like that. So very traditional intellectual pursuits, music, art, things like that. They like proven products. And I give you the example here of the Millionaire Next Door. There are a group of economists that wanted to write about the average or typical American. It turns out there are a lot of those millionaires in America. They wanted to write about the average. So they rented this fancy hotel room. The guys who wrote the book, The Millionaire Next Door, they rented this fancy hotel room. They had caviar, which was a big thing, by the way, at the time the book was written, to eat caviar. You all have probably had some caviar if you like sushi. It's also called what? That's the common term, but it's also called roe. if you have different types of, but it's the sort of sophisticated term is caviar. The best caviar comes from, what? It's beluga caviar comes from Russia. So they did all this stuff. They put out this fancy schmancy spread. They invited them up to this big, sort of penthouse suite in this hotel to interview them. And it turns out these people were really off-put by that. The average millionaire lived in the same house. They're like Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's a billionaire. He lives in the same house he bought for his first wife almost 50 years ago that he paid $30,000 for. Still lives in that house to this day. The average car at that time that they drove was a Ford Taurus. Usually they did not buy new. They bought a recently, sort of a recent secondhand model. Not a really old Ford Taurus, but they would buy the program cars or the demos or things like that. So they like proven products, the Ford Taurus. And so that's the kind of products that traders are interested in. Then you have believers. They have low resources. They believe in basic rights lead to the good life, basic values. They like friendly communities. They're inspired by faith and spirituality. They like TV and romance novels in a big way. They're very interested in stability. They view advertising as a very legitimate source of information about products, and they tend to be extraordinarily brand loyal. Then you have achievers. Achievers have high access to resource. They may be what we call yuppies, which are newly created wealth. They have a tendency to put themselves and their family first. They're climbing the social ladder. They tend to be goal-oriented and very hardworking. They have busy schedules. They have a tendency to stick with the status quo and moderate values. They like technology if it will contribute to their productivity. They don't like it for itself. I sort of like figuring things out just for my own sake to see if I can do it. But they like it only if it adds to productivity. They tend to be peer conscious, and they're usually professional. Now, why is it that you find more of the younger in this category as opposed to the thinkers, which tend to be somewhat older? And I said those were also professionals. Generally speaking, once you retire, you have the advantage of doing what? Not caring what people think so much about. Once you've achieved the success on the corporate ladder and you retire, you care less. But while you're climbing it, you generally are very peer conscious of your peers. You want to get ahead. Strivers. Strivers have low access to resources. They switch jobs regularly. A lot of your age group and demographic fit into this. They enjoy video games and gaming for fantasy. They tend to be fun-loving. They're the centers of low-status street culture. By the way, Paseo would be indicative of that, sort of the hipster movement. They have a desire to better their lives, but they oftentimes find it difficult. Your generation is one of the first that I used to be able to say, if you wanted to be successful, go to college. A college degree no longer guarantees success. There are a lot of people that are out there that are, that are struggling, and they've gone through college and they've got this degree, and they're still working for Starbucks as a barista, and they're finding a hard time. Why is that? Because college doesn't guarantee success. It somewhat levels the playing field. That was not true in the 1950s. In the 1950s or 60s, if you could go to college, you could achieve upper middle class status just by virtue of the fact that you went to college. That's no longer true. Experiencers have high resources. They want everything. They're into the latest fashion. They'll go against the grain. They're enormously social. Experiencers like things like iFly, Top Golf. They like physical activity. They have heightened senses of visualization and visual stimulation. So they're constantly wanting new things, to try new things. Then you have makers, which have low resources. They distrust government. They like outdoor activities like hunting and fishing. They believe in strong gender roles. They tend to be anti-intellectual. They want to own their own land. There's something nice and psychological for them about, this is mine, I can exclude you, stay away. They tend to live outside of cities rather than inside cities because they want to be able to do what they want. If I want to put that shed back there and start a skunk works, I should be able to do it. You shouldn't be able to tell me that I can't. And they want to protect what's theirs. At the very bottom are survivors. These are the lowest resource group. They are very risk adverse. They're often older. Now, I've told you that the greatest transfer of wealth is from young to old, and that's true in this country. But there are a lot of older people that are struggling, that did not plan for retirement, on a fixed income, relying solely on Social Security, and they are very thrifty. They're very brand loyal. They watch TV the most out of any group. They are the least likely to have a computer, the most likely to still have a landline of any of the groups and to use it, not have a cell phone. And they like proven, sort of reliable, value thrifty products. Now with that, I'm going to give you the critical thinking challenge. So if you go to D2L, you'll see and I'm going to go and view as a student. You go to assessments, into the Dropbox, you'll see the VALS critical thinking challenge. If you click on that, there are instructions. So for part one, I want you to assume that you are an entrepreneur who wants to open a new restaurant in Oklahoma City. What benefits can you get from the VALS survey? So you might want to go to Strategic Business Insight, look at VALS for businesses and how they use it. So I say hint, you should look at the Strategic Business Insight website. And then I want you to think for the second part about restaurants that you know in Oklahoma City. And for each VALS type, I want you to identify that would appeal to individuals of that type and to justify your answer. I'm going to give you the rest of class today, which is 15 minutes, and I will give you an additional time on Thursday to think about this, and then we will talk about your answers. Drop it into the Dropbox, and again, this is your opportunity to win bonus points for exceptional answers. So what would I do if I were doing this? I would write it as an argumentative essay in a narrative form, and I would have a really good detailed analysis of why you think each restaurant would be appealable to certain types of people. All right, certain types. So you might want to say, can I use my example? What is a restaurant that I think that is going to be attractive to innovators? Well, when it first opened, at least, there was a restaurant at the top of the Devon Tower called Vast. How many of you have heard of Vast? It was new, it was hip, it was, they had lots of rules. We tried to eat there one night, and they were like, oh, you got all these rules. That would have been very attractive to people who were innovators. So I will give you the rest of class to work on those. If you have questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes. And if not, I will stop the video, and I will see you on Thursday.